Hi, I'm your host, Joe Fitzgerald, and welcome back to the Visual Lease Data Institute podcast. Here at VL, we empower organizations to turn their lease portfolio into a strategic asset. Our solutions help companies easily sustain compliance with FASB, IFRS, and GASB lease accounting standards, and implement proper lease controls to improve the financial and operational performance of their leases. Today, I'm joined by Jamie Covert, President of Scribcor Global Lease Administration, a valued partner of Visual Lease. Jamie is here today to discuss a very important distinction between two mission-critical business functions, lease accounting and lease administration. While the two may sound similar, they're actually quite different. Utilizing both processes in the right way can really make a big impact when it comes to compliance, maintenance, and future lease portfolio optimization. So let's dive right in. Welcome, Jamie. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Joe. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Hey, so Jamie, first question, how do you see lease administrators supporting the office of the CFO?
So today, lease administration is supporting the office of the CFO by maintaining the critical lease data and the components that are supporting their ASC 842 and IFRS calculations. Those are anything from amendments to any changes in the leases, terminations. All that data has to be maintained, and lease administration plays a critical role in making sure that data is accurate and that they're communicating to the accounting team so that before they go into a month end and quarter end close, they know all of the leases that have been updated and that need to be amended on the financial statement. So lease administration really is they're holding the keys to the data, and they need to be pretty seamlessly integrated with the office of the CFO and the controller, so that they're generating those those schedules for the 10Ks and the 10Qs timely.
Some people view leases as a one and done when they are first recorded. Is that really the right way to view leases?
No, actually, leases are dynamic. A lease portfolio changes on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Leases have variable expenses, one-time charges. Leases contain escalation amounts. There's a lot of leases, especially international leases, are tied to indexation and indexes. And so there is always something changing in a lease portfolio. The larger the portfolio, the more the changes. So really, in consistent with everything that we'll probably cover today, having a solid and sound process for lease administration is really critical. The process here in the U.S. is different than in U.S. and Canada is really different than it is in international lease administration. So really having clearly documented processes and playbooks is something that that we advise all of our clients, and that when we're operating and taking over that function, we absolutely have those, and it brings benefits. Having whether you're using a third party or whether you have a team of internal experts, having qualified lease administrators is going to improve your internal controls. It's going to improve the speed that you're able to access data and report. It's going to be vital for internal and external audit support. So as companies are going through audit processes, having all these things managed in a sound way is going to improve that process and speed that process. And then the biggest component, leases contain so much valuable data for organizations that go into strategic planning. They're supporting forecasting, impact analysis, lots of various financial data. Space planning is become huge now with our post-COVID world, and with a lot of companies moving to flex and remote work. So in order to adequately space plan, you need up to the minute lease administration data and data on all those lease obligations. So these are really important components to being able to deliver and execute on all those things.
So given all the activities you just described, do you find that companies are underestimating the time they need to administer leases?
Not all companies. I think where there's a lot of challenges and where companies underestimate is it's the effort and the time that goes into building those those processes, especially for companies that have gone through mergers or, have decentralized situations. It takes an enormous amount of time to organize a global portfolio. And so if there's anything that's, overlooked, I think it's the speed and the time and just the manual process and the hours that it takes to get that portfolio organized. But as far as the day-to-day, I mean, really there's three real kind of critical components that we manage as lease administrators on a day-to-day basis. And you break them down into categories to changes to the portfolio, your variable expenses, and then your risk mitigation. And changes to the portfolio would be any new leases or amendments that are executed, renewal letters, any terminations, and then acquisitions. Companies are always acquiring other companies, and so you really need to have the appropriate resources in place to handle an acquisition, whether that's an internal resource or whether you have a third party that you may lean on during an acquisition. But it really comes down to handling all of these things. It's a documented process. Most critical step is you really want to build a lease abstraction scope of work. Sometimes people refer to that as data attributes. You want to be as consistent as possible across your portfolio with abstracting the same amount of data in the same fashion for each location. The second category I would describe as variable and other expenses. The most common, and I think the most important, is common area maintenance, also referred to as operating expenses, CAM reconciliations, operating expense reconciliations. This is one of the most important functions that a lease administration team performs because it's a really significant generator of savings. Unfortunately, errors in these reconciliations can be common, and having a process and a documented process of exactly what you're going to cover in what's called a desktop audit, coupled with some type of a formal full audit program, is the best possible solution in terms of making sure that your company is maximizing that savings component. You should really be building out a process where during your desktop audit, you're flagging and identifying leases that should be moved on to the full audit team. Most of the time it does need to be handled by a different team because it's a different skill. I guess that the last category that I would bring up are your ongoing risks. And I really think the ongoing risks are most efficiently mitigated and almost completely resolved when you put in a solid, process and procedures from the start with a well-documented playbook. But some of those, things that can come up are, missed or delayed payments. These are frequent when you have a landlord change or a vendor change or a bank change that isn't communicated to the lease administration team. Sometimes that's from the property manager's office. Other times that could be, internally if things are decentralized. If invoices are received at the local level, sometimes there's failures to forward those. So, having processes in place to mitigate that makes a lot of sense. As long as you're using a database, usually, you don't have to deal with any kind of manual errors or formula errors. But, for companies that are still working in Excel spreadsheets, this can be something that can occur and can present challenges. One of the things that we're seeing, unfortunately, that is increasing is fraud. Cyber security and email fraud. I mean, it's becoming much more common. So, having dual controls in place for certain things, like when you're changing an ACH information or when you're changing a vendor, putting something like that in place is going to mitigate any instances of fraud. Having callbacks where you're actually verifying something over the phone with somebody versus just taking their email, because we've seen some pretty sophisticated spoofs from time to time where it looks like an email is coming from a person you've been working with for months or years, but that's not always the case. So those are really some of the ongoing risks that companies face, that if they put processes together, you can pretty much mitigate those.
Yeah, so Jamie, you've covered off a lot of topics for us. As we wrap up, any closing thoughts or key takeaways for the listener?
Yeah, just really again hammering home the same point of process. If you document your processes and you follow through, then I think you're going to mitigate most of your problems, and you're going to be very proactive, and you're going to be an asset to your the rest of your internal internal teams on the strategy side, on the transaction side, in the accounting office, and really just, having lease administration as a significant, collaborator, within those other internal departments. There are a few new things coming down the road, and it'll be interesting to see what role lease administration plays. There's, I know everyone's trying to figure out ESG right now. Europe is obviously a lot further down the road than we here are in the U.S. We'll know the requirements at some point in the U.S. And once we know, what the requirements are and how those calculations are going to work and what exactly we're going to be calculating and measuring, I think what's clear is that real estate is going to be a big component. What's unclear is just, who's going to be responsible for what. But I do think that some of that is going to be within the real estate group, and lease administration will probably play a part of that. And, then as I mentioned before, everyone's really trying to figure out, what's the right size of our portfolio now? So space planning is critical, and lease administration and the data that lease administration is responsible for is really a critical component, so that companies can effectively make proactive decisions as they have leases coming up for renewal.
That will conclude today's episode of the VLDI Podcast. Jamie, thank you so much for coming on the show and providing your expert knowledge and insights. If you enjoyed this episode and want to catch up on other resources from the Visual Lease Data Institute, be sure to follow our LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook pages at Visual Lease, as well as our new LinkedIn community page, which you can join by using the link in the YouTube description below. And don't forget to tune into the next episode of the Visual Lease Data Institute podcast, where our focus is on helping you leverage your lease portfolio as a strategic asset.